Hi, thanks for tuning in today. Today I want to share two things with you. One is I want to share with you one of the reasons, kind of continuing the theme of traditional text positions, one of the reasons why some people hold to traditional text position. And I also want to kind of make this a sort of a preface for a video that I'm going to have released on Friday. I filmed that video quite some time back, and I felt like it was maybe going to be a little bit controversial, and I'm not in this to make enemies or cause people to feel like they need to go to war on these text issues or anything like that. So that video that I've got coming out, I wanted to say a few things, a few words to kind of preface that video that I've got coming. But let me first share with you one of the reasons why some people hold to a traditional text position. Now, you might think they're wrong for holding to this idea, but if nothing else, even if you think they're wrong, I think you'll be able to understand a little bit more where traditional text advocates are coming from. And so really, I just actually want to start out by quoting a verse of scripture. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." Now, that's one of the most famous verses in the Bible. So I learned that text as God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, his only begotten Son. Now, you might think that's the word his there isn't necessarily all that important. You might think it's unimportant. If you're reading from a critical text, some critical editions do not contain, or perhaps all critical editions do not contain the word his, okay? And that's maybe a minor difference, but if you learn that verse that way, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, you learn that word his as part of Scripture. Now, that's maybe just a small example, but it actually did sort of surprise me because that's such a common verse, and yet it's not unaffected by textual criticism. And the theory that lies behind modern textual criticism, there is no reason at all to say that it's impossible that a new stash of manuscripts might be found in Egypt or somewhere else that might have different readings than what the critical edition has right now, and could potentially change those readings. So if you found a whole stash of manuscripts that read that maybe it totally took John 3:16 out. Now, we're not anticipating that to happen, but there's nothing in theory that says it couldn't happen. And this is exactly what happened in the 19th century. And this is why people like Dean Burgon were alarmed. Not because he was unaware of these early manuscripts, and quite the contrary. He was a fine textual critic in his own right. He knew what he was doing, smart guy. But suddenly you find, the Codex Sinaiticus, for example, and whole verses, whole sections, which people were used to reading from their Bible, were suddenly omitted. And so they found other papyri manuscripts seemed to support that. Now, whether you think they're right to take those verses out, or to on their view would be to purify the text, whether you think that's right or not, you have to admit that there's nothing, I think, in theory that couldn't say that another verse from Scripture could possibly be removed in the future. Because in the 19th century, everybody was used to reading, not everybody, but the average Bible-believing Christian were used to having particular texts in their Bible. And suddenly, some of those texts weren't there anymore. And the part that's important here to note is that there's nothing in theory that says that more verses or portions of verses or little bits of scripture could suddenly, another group of manuscripts could be found, early manuscripts, and some of those bits of scripture, fragments of scripture, could change. And so part of the question is, for traditional text advocates, is the stability of the text and the theory that lies behind the text. Do we have a stable text that's going to be consistent for my children's children and their children, for many generations, or do we have a text that's in flux? And so that is one of the concerns, whether you think it's right, whether you think it's wrong, whether you think that's a great reason. I'm not saying it's one of the scholarly reasons that's put out there for the Byzantine text, but it definitely is one of the things that factors into some people's thinking on this. I wanted to explain that to you so that you could understand, because in theory, another verse could be brought into question. At least parts or words of scripture could be brought into question in the future. There's nothing in critical text theory that would suggest that that's impossible. Quite the contrary, it's very possible. So that's one thought there. And so the other thing I wanted to share with you is I've got a video coming out. I've scheduled it for Friday, and it talks about some of the reservations that I have, particularly about the Nestle Aland text. Now, I have reviewed quite favorably the Tyndale Greek New Testament. I have a high regard for the people that have put that together, even though I wish they would interact more with the Byzantine text and give variants, and I've mentioned all that on this channel before. But I have some reservations about the Nestle Aland text. But before you watch that video, I do want to say these things. If you're interested in textual criticism, I think it's probably good to have a critical edition like that. It gives tons of information and a one handy volume. So as far as knowing what manuscripts read what, I think anybody who's deeply interested in textual criticism will want a Nestle Aland text. Also, I would like to say that by presenting the video in the way that I have, I want to just be very upfront and say the men that have put that together are far, far, far beyond me in their abilities and intelligence and the textual work that they've done. My concerns that I have that I lay out in that video are a different kind of concern. It's a kind of concern that any ordinary Christian might have. And I approach that not as an expert looking at that text, but as a fellow Christian, fellow believer, one who's like you and want to be able to approach the text with an honest and sincere heart, and just presenting some thoughts and concerns in that video. And you can take it, you can evaluate it, you can maybe help me if you feel like I'm in error. But there's some concerns that I have there, and I just want to put that out there to preface it, because it's a serious body of scholarship, and I appreciate the hard work that men have gone to put the textual apparatus together, and lots of good things. I refer to the Nestle Aland text quite frequently in my own studies, so I want to put that out there, my concerns, and just sort of soften the blow a little bit of the video that's coming in on Friday. So anyways, just some thoughts for tonight. I hope the Lord blesses you, and we'll see you in a future video.